Hey there, weavers, welcome back. This is Grace with Tangled Webs Weaving, and I am starting to wind the warp for my hand spun double weave, double width blanket. So as a reminder, this is a hand spun yarn that I have spun myself, and I'm going to be creating a queen size coverlet for my bed. And it's going to be 104 inches wide by 94 inches long, and that should hang over all the sides of my bed sufficiently to make it so I can just leave it on the bed and use it as a coverlet. So the pattern that I have chosen by necessity is a 4-shaft pattern. And what I have done is used just a straight 2-2 twill, and in a kind of a tartan pattern that I have designed. So let's take a look at that real quick. So here you can see the pattern that I designed, and it starts off with the black on the right and has some gray and green stripes with the red and black and white in there. I use these colors really just to kind of get an idea of how it would look, but the colors are not nearly as bright on what I really have based as opposed to what I have designed on the screen. For instance, the red stripes are not nearly that bright. So I'm hoping that it will be a little more subdued. The blue is not that bright. The green is really not that bright. So just to give you an example, here is the yarn that I'm working with. So here's the yarn that I'm working with, and you can see that the red here is more of a rust color. The blue is not as bright, it's more subdued. The green, again, is the same way. It's not really that bright, it's more subdued. And I'm actually wondering if on camera it looks brighter than it really is in life. And then I've got two different grays. Most of the yarn that I'm using is Shetland wool from Paradise Fibers, but I had this is some Gotland wool that I got off of Etsy, and so I spun that up, and I'm going to be using this as one shade of gray, and then this is more of a kind of a brownish gray, and the white is are locks that I got off of Etsy, and I spun those. So those are not Shetland wool, but hopefully there's not much of the white being used, and there's a fair amount of the gray, but the Gotland should be okay. It's a lot softer than the rest of the Shetland, but I'm hoping that it will be fine. So I put the information into my yarn calculator here and came up with my yarn needs and how long each warp thread needed to be, and we kind of talked about that in the last video I did on doing sampling to come up with what your shrinkage rate is and your take up, and just kind of what set you need to use, especially if you're using hand spun. And so I came up with needing 1,073 warp ends, and that is going to be 4,000 yards of yarn. And then my weft is, since it's a little bit shorter than it is wide, it's going to be 1,000 50 picks, and that is almost 3,100 yards. So it's a lot of yarn. And then I took my pattern and I came up with my warping color order, and so that's what I'm going to be doing, working off of today. So we'll get set up and start measuring this out. So you may have noticed that when I showed you the yarn that I have taken the skeins and I put one color or one of each color into a cake like this so that I can pull it out of a center pull ball more easily and not have to use the yarn swift to warp directly from. So I've got one cake of each of my colors, and now I need to measure out the path on my warping board. Now, when you're working with either hand spun or hand spun wool or knitting yarn, it's a lot more stretchy than say a cotton 2/8 cotton is. So I figured out the hard way that you need to measure out how long one warp thread is on your warping board instead of measuring out a string that's that long and then warping to that. Because what happens is if I measure out this string 3 3/4 yards long, this is a cotton string, it doesn't stretch, and even if it did, I've got how long the 3 3/4 yards is. And then when I warp my wool, it stretches. So even if I'm trying to be very careful and not stretch it, it's going to stretch along the path. And then I get it all wound on and I pull it off, then it collapses. Well, now my warp is short. So I've figured out that if I measure out 3 3/4 yards unstretched and I warp that on and figure out my path, and then I put my string on that designates my path, that's going to give me a more accurate length of my warp. So even if it does stretch a little bit, it's going to be stretching to, say, 4 yards instead of 3 3/4. Well, probably not that far, but you understand what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to start with black. So we'll get my tape measure out here. Okay, so I've got my super duper long tape measure. Okay, so I'm going to take and I'm going to measure 3 3/4 yards, and I'm going to not stretch the yarn at all, or as little as possible. That is 3 3/4 right there. All right, I'll drop that. And I am just going to make a loose overhand knot right there. Okay, so that is where the end of my 3 3/4 yards is. Now I'm going to take this end and I'm going to a slip knot in it. And then I'm going to take my warping string off so that we can use it after the fact. And I'm going to wind my wool on just as if I was going to warp it. So right about there is, so it's tight, but it's not overly tight. And that is where it's going to go. So we're going to take our path string now, and we're going to run it along the path that we did with our yarn. And we come down here, and I've got a loop here it extends a little bit beyond where my length is, but that's fine. And then to demonstrate or to prove out the theory, I will measure this path string and see how much longer it is. So I wasn't off by that much. So it stretched 1/4 yard. So if I were to have measured out 3 3/4 yards with my cotton path string and then measured out my warp, I would have come up 1/4 yard short. So that's why it's really important to do it this way when you're working with stretchy yarn. Okay. Okay. And now we can take our wool off of there and put it down here. And we can put our path string up. So it's a little bit, all right. So because my path string is a lot longer than what I need, I've got extra just kind of hanging off there. I don't need to mess around with. There. All right, so that's our path string, and that is what we are going to warp to. So now I can take this and I can start warping. And again, I'm not going to pull this super tight. And I need to have a cross down here. And because I am doing double weave or double width, I laid this out to have, there's basically twice as many ends as what will end up being needed. So for this, each end of the blanket calls for 20 warp threads of black. So I'm going to be winding 40 warp threads. And if you'd like to see more information about how double weave for double width weaving works, I did a live stream a while back, and I will put a link to that video up in the, I think it's in the left-hand corner of this video, so that you can check that out. It's really a fascinating process. I really like double weave. So my loom is 54 inches wide, maximum weaving width, and my blanket is going to be 107.1 inches in the reed, which should end up, after take up, shrinkage, and draw in, hopefully will end up being about 101 inches wide. And I'm able to do that because I'm going to be weaving 2 layers of cloth at the same time. And then when I'm done weaving, I will open it up, take it off the loom, open it up, and I will have a blanket that is twice as wide as what I wove. So because I'm lazy and I don't use a counting cross, I need to stop and count. Okay, so I got, all right, there's 20. Working sheet, and I did 40 black. Right now we're going to do 26 gray. So I will take my gray, put it down here, and I am just going to tie on to the end of my black. Just do an overhand knot there, nothing special, and then we will do 26 of these. So when I was putting all this yarn together, and that is, so right here, this was some of the first yarn that I spun by hand, and evidently I have a thin spot right here, so I'm going to back this up and treat it like a broken thread or a knot, because I don't want that thin spot in the middle of my blanket. All right, I was saying, when I was pulling all this yarn out, planning this blanket, I noted that the date that I purchased most of this yarn was in April of 2020. So this has been a 3+ year project. Now, I haven't been working on it the whole time. Obviously, I've been doing other things, but it's kind of been in the works, little working on it a little bit here and there. I use these chip clips to secure my cross. The cross down here is the cross that I use. So we'll put these clips on here. All right, and then this one will secure the end. Like so. Okay. And now I can cut that there. All right, and then, I'm going, this cross up here, I tie with a string. And this is my safety cross. So if for some reason I lose this cross down here, this is my backup cross. And it will only be used if I lose that one. All right, so now I'm going to take it off and chain it. This is the end that will be through my reed eventually, the end of my warp. And this will go over my warping rod on the back. So I'm going to start from up here and chain it. Half the time I get it mixed up and I end up doing the first one wrong, and then it's just a mess. So we keep tension on it, and then just chain it up. And I didn't mean to do that. This is what happens when you try and get too much on your warp pegs. making a mess of this. All right. So I think I'm not going to put as much on the next bout, because that's just too much. Fortunately, this isn't very twisty. It's very balanced, so it's not trying to twist in on itself and tangle. So there we go, first one down. Now I am going to number this also because I'm gonna have a lot of bouts and I don't want to get them mixed up. So I'm going to just write a number on a little piece of paper and tie it to each bout and number them successively. Alright, so we're finally done, and because of the way that this is designed, there's an odd number of threads. So the last thread, instead of ending up here at the top and giving me an even number, is going to end down here at this peg. So I'm just going to figure out how long it is, pull it off, and I will do a overhand knot and create a loop there. And that will go through my warping bar. So I can go ahead and cut that off. So that's the last one, and now we can take it to the loom and start winding it on. So I hope you enjoyed watching me wind this warp onto my warping board, and if you did, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks, and happy weaving!